Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts on a topic that's been on the lips of a lot of endgame raiders over the past week or so. You see, it was confirmed that Pandemonium's next raid tier, that of the Abyssos tier, will actually have its normal and savage difficulty release dates split by a week. So on patch 6.2's release, which is currently slated for late August, there will be the MSQ, there will be the new EX trial, all the contents, and of course, the normal mode of Pandemonium Abyssos. 1 week later, the Savage mode of Abyssos will be released. Now, I have been advocating for change like this for a long time. In fact, some of you may be surprised to learn that it's not already that way, especially if you're newer to Final Fantasy XIV. The 0.0 patches normally have a delay between the 0.0 patch, another 2 weeks for normal, and then another 2 weeks for Savage, so a month before the whole tier is even available. But the 0.2 and 0.4 patches don't have such a delay, or historically have not. They would normally release the normal and savage difficulty all on the same day. This is not something that I've been a fan of, and I was very hopeful when they mentioned last expansion that they were considering a change like this going into patch 6.2 way in the future. And that's crazy, because I am someone who literally counts the calendar days between endgame content tiers in Final Fantasy XIV. So for that reason, I wanted to make a video talking about why I'm a huge fan of this change and why I hope it stays. Right now, this is only a test run, and it could go back to being the way it was before by the time 6.4 rolls around. So for me, the biggest reason right out the gate is the ability to enjoy the patch for all of its content in a healthier fashion. When you're a raider, a hardcore raider, Savage kind of dominates those first few days of the patch. Rush through the login and the normal modes to get to the Savage so we can bash our heads against it as hard as possible. I've always wanted to just, on every patch, be able to enjoy the MSQ, enjoy the new EX trial, dungeons, PvP updates, and even just enjoy the normal mode and its story like everyone else, with the inability to do so this whole time, skipping all the normal mode story quests and then having a new game plus them, or in the past make whole new characters just so I can see the story cutscenes because they're not all in that book back in the in-room. It's just not the greatest way to enjoy a patch, even if Savage is one of the main contents that I enjoy the most. I just happen to be an every content kind of guy. Almost every content at the very least, and I just want to be able to treat this like I do that 0.0 patch cycle like I mentioned earlier. I don't want normal mode delayed though, not like the 0.0 patch, no, just Savage, delay it 1 or 2 weeks, but 1 week is fine. Now, of course, I do have one more selfish reason than most other people do when it comes to wanting that delay. Content creation. I want to be able to share with you all the guides, all the thoughts, updates, etc. Everything about the patch and not just the Savage, which is what normally happens. This is what my schedule looks like during Savage. We get in the game, we get through normal, I post just the first clears of that on YouTube, whatever, no big deal. And then Savage comes around and I basically don't do anything for a couple days until I have it beat. Then I rush to get some very basic Savage guides out so that people might have an easier time getting through those initial encounters. And then eventually something better will hopefully come out and be circulated, hopefully, amongst the community. I find that kind of feels like working backwards. So I have to do the Savage mode, and then I have to go back and do the normal, and then I have to go back and do the extreme, and then if I want to, I go back and do the dungeon, then I go back and do PvP. I essentially am just working kind of down the pyramid of the content as opposed to starting from the bottom and kind of climbing my way back up. And that's just not as good for content creation. It's not as fun for content creation, and it's just it's a less exciting format for me to approach it with. I just want to be able to bring you all as much content as possible. Now, I do like the 1 week delay for other reasons as well. I'll just rattle a few off. For one, an extra week of time for raiders to get time off of work should they desire it. If people enjoy something, they're going to get time off of work for it. And sometimes trying to predict the patch schedule is a little hard for some people, especially when they need to have a specific amount of notice to get out of work. So that's a thing that's really, again, kind of for a small percentage of the community, but I think some people do understand how it goes. It also ensures that, and this is a big one, the login queue and how quickly you can get through normal mode isn't a factor when getting to the Savage content. Everybody wants to log into patch 6.2 day for their own reasons, and we all know how that's kind of been as of late, especially when it came to Endwalker's initial release. There were tons of server issues for the last Savage tier as well in Endwalker, and so this is just not an outcome that we want again, even though they are working on ensuring a more consistent experience. There's also been cases in the past, in Stormblood in particular, where they put solo duties in the normal mode, and then those have all sorts of congestion issues, or there's issues I just want to avoid, and I think that this helps. It also allows those of us who are planning on doing the fight to analyze and dissect the encounters a little bit more, and I think that makes for a healthier prog experience. We can also do things like farm the EX trials and maybe farm materia or get more mats for the following week. There's so many reasons why it's a healthier option for the game than the previous arrangement that we had. Now, I won't act like there definitely are downsides to this as well, though some of them are kind of unclear at the moment. For example, we don't know if weekly capped tombstones or crafted gear will be available for that week before Savage. Right now, they've made no mention of changing that, so we can assume that weekly capped tomes and crafted gear will be obtainable in the week prior to the tier's actual launch, and that does have some ramifications. On the tombstone front, having a week of capped tomes before going into Savage the following week means that you'll have a total of 900 tomes across the first 2 weeks, and those 900 tomes are going to be used to help make that Savage tier a little bit easier. The big thing is that once you beat the second and third encounter in Savage, somebody will be able to buy an item level 630 weapon, and of course you're going to have your most powerful DPS go out of their way to get this to make that prog that much easier. The question then becomes, do they consider that and kind of raise the bar on the DPS checks, especially for the second and third tier, a little bit more than they did in the past? Or does just doing the mechanics become the most important thing and you have that extra bit of leeway for the Savage prog? It's a question that needs answering, so we might need to come back and criticize this later once the tier is actually released. Now, on the crafting front, without day one raid crafting, the market does degrade even faster. I mean, don't get me wrong, it already falls apart on patch release within about half a day, even less than that. But outside of food and pots, that's just going to be even more true if the recipes are available a week before the raid tier. This affects a super small percentage of day one raid crafters, but I'd be loath not to mention it. Now, earlier I mentioned the ability to analyze and dissect the normal mode encounters before going into Savage with that extra week of time, and that does kind of ease the difficulty of some of the encounters a little bit. I know it may not seem like a lot, normal and Savage really aren't the same thing, but ability names and being able to suspect certain things and predict how it might interact with the player in Savage goes a long way. You'll often hear hardcore raiders really advocate for how much this helps during the 0.0 patch and how they actually enjoy not having access to it in the 0.2 or 0.4 patches. It's a lot more about really quick analysis and thinking, being able to just come up with strategies that are not so thought out ahead of time. Really have to think on your feet. Yeah, that's going to affect it, but honestly, super hardcore peeps, they beat it in a day anyway, beat it in a day or two anyway. So for me, I don't know. I don't really consider it much of anything at all. Like, yeah, you'll be able to analyze it for a week, and okay, it's not like it completely trivializes it. It makes a difference, but I just don't see a reason to hold off on the tier for this particular thing. If anything, what makes more sense is Raiders just being like, well, I guess I have to wait one more week for the content that I really enjoy the most. Again, I'm personally not concerned over that. Again, they beat it in a day or two anyway, so what's another week of waiting just to be over with it as quickly as possible regardless? Not to mention, we know we're getting more difficult content in the form of Criterion dungeons in the 6.2 cycle. We're getting a new Ultimate in 6.3, assuming that doesn't get pushed back or delayed. We have a new Savage tier in 0.4 and 2 more Criterion dungeons in 0.4 and 0.5. I feel like we're going to be eating pretty good in terms of the middle to hardcore content in this expansion, so really not worried about 1 week. And the final thing I've seen people raise concerns about is people without set raid groups that rely on Party Finder having 1 less week of loot before Ultimate releases. Now, 1 less week shouldn't matter much, especially given that you're also given 2 weeks in patch 6.3 before Ultimate itself releases. This has the upgrade materials from the 24-man, you can earn them from the hunt, and it's 2 more weeks of raiding. But honestly, the bigger thing, and don't forget this, all of our patch cycles are 2 weeks at minimum longer than they were before. So if anything, this just reduces the net amount of weeks that we get from plus 2 weeks minimum to plus 1 week minimum. So we're still gaining weeks overall from what we're used to in the past. Now, it's not to mention that I feel like there are pretty simple solutions to a lot of these concerns. The Tombstone one I think needs to stay as is. I really don't think they need to mess with that. That's something that's not just in the game for raiders. It's for everybody to feel like they're making some progress, and it does give some direction to that first week. For crafting, if they really cared about this specific thing I mentioned, they could delay the materials and recipes a week. And if raid loot before ultimate is a concern, then honestly, I personally think it's time for them to lift the loot restriction on Savage much earlier. That's even regardless of thinking about how long it takes to get ultimate gear between patch 6.2 and 6.3. I'm thinking about the people who decide they maybe want to try for an ultimate tier but haven't been playing all of patch 6.2 to make sure they have best in slot. Maybe they see the new ultimate come out, they want to get into it, but then they're told they need all this gear and they're weekly locked, and every week they'll go and clear it and they're just like, okay, I'll get there eventually. I get that they do it because it's an MMO and they want weekly gates because it promotes, maintaining subscriptions, but I would personally be an advocate for removing the Savage loot lockout in odd numbered patches like 0.1, 0.3, and 0.5. On top of that of course leaves the Tombstones, which is probably the bigger problem in all honesty. They could probably do with adjusting that in odd numbered patches as well, and not just 0.5 when they raise the cap to 900. I mean, in all of the odd numbered patches, especially if you're going to be releasing Ultimate. That's something that you really need to adhere to. You have to think about when people will be able to get into it if they were to start at a specific time. Overall, I'm so thrilled that they're doing this. It's gonna be one of the most exciting patches for me, regardless of this. I can't wait to see where the MSQ goes. I'm really hoping the EX Trials are the 4 Archfiends from Final Fantasy IV. Pandemonium's story, well, I can say this of all the stories, the second one is normally where the juicy stuff usually starts happening. So I didn't want to skip through that. Not to mention, again, we have the Savage tier, all the loot that's going to be leading towards Ultimate. We have the Criterion dungeons. We even have just the base variant dungeons. We have the new Tribal quest. We have the side story quest. There's so many little things that I'm excited for across 6.2 and then eventually leading into 6.3. And this only helps me kind of get that extra point to enjoy it. But all of this is just my thoughts. I'm just sharing with you how I feel about this, and it's not a general consensus of how everybody else feels about it. So let me know what you think in the comment section of the video below. Are you a fan of the 1 week delay between normal and Savage, or are you not? And tell me why in the comment section of the video below. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video, and until then, take care.